Criminals don't search for weak people. They search for predictable minds. Some victims are confident. Some are intelligent. Some are strong, successful, and respected. Yet they all share something invisible, a psychological pattern that makes them easier to exploit than they realize. And the most dangerous part, these patterns don't feel like mistakes. They feel like being human. Before we begin, answer this honestly in the comments. Have you ever wondered why certain people always seem to get taken advantage of, even when they're smart? And if you want to understand the psychology criminals look for when choosing their targets, subscribe to Criminology, hit the notification bell, and like this video. Awareness is not paranoia. It's protection. Trust is not weakness, but speed of trust can be. One of the most common psychological mistakes that makes people easy targets is granting trust before it has been earned. This doesn't mean being naive or foolish. It means allowing emotional comfort to override time, evidence, and consistency. Human beings are wired to bond quickly. Our brains evolved to form alliances, build cooperation, and seek safety through connection. When someone appears friendly, familiar, or emotionally open, the brain releases chemicals associated with trust and bonding. This process happens automatically, long before logic has a chance to intervene. Understand this instinct. Deeply they know that trust doesn't require truth. It requires emotional reassurance. This is why manipulators often feel easy to talk to. They listen attentively. They mirror your body language, tone, and opinions. They agree with you quickly. They share personal stories early, sometimes painful ones, to create the illusion of vulnerability. Your brain interprets this as honesty and alignment. But what's really happening is calibration. Manipulators study how you respond. What makes you relax? What makes you open up? What earns your sympathy? They are not connecting. They are mapping. Psychologically, this mistake is driven by familiarity bias. The brain assumes that people who feel familiar are safe. That assumption once protected humans in small tribal groups. In modern society, it becomes a liability. Familiarity can now be manufactured within minutes. When trust forms too quickly, critical thinking weakens. Red flags feel smaller. Inconsistencies get ignored. The mind fills in gaps with optimism. You may even defend the person internally, rationalizing behavior that would concern you if it came from someone else. This is why many victims say the same thing afterward. They didn't seem like that kind of person. That's because criminals rarely appear threatening. They appear reasonable, normal, relatable. By the time harmful behavior emerges, emotional investment has already formed, and withdrawing feels uncomfortable. Another factor is oversharing. When someone reveals personal information early, the brain feels compelled to reciprocate. Once personal details are exchanged, the relationship feels deeper than it actually is. This creates false intimacy, closeness without foundation. Criminals exploit this gap. Trusting too quickly doesn't just expose information, it exposes access. Access to emotions, to resources, to influence. Once someone has access, manipulation becomes subtle and continuous rather than forceful. The warning sign is speed. Healthy trust builds through time, consistency, and observation. When trust feels intense but premature, when connection skips steps, vulnerability increases. Trust is meant to grow, not rush. Another psychological mistake criminals rely on is conflict avoidance. Many people associate conflict with danger, rejection, or emotional discomfort. They prefer harmony. They value peace. They don't want to upset others. On the surface, this seems like a strength, empathy, politeness, emotional intelligence. But criminals see something else. They see compliance, potential. Conflict-avoidant individuals are more likely to agree just to keep things calm. They hesitate to say no. They soften boundaries. They delay confrontation. This creates a powerful opening for manipulation because resistance feels more uncomfortable than compliance. Psychologically, this is driven by the brain's desire to avoid social tension. Humans evolved in groups where exclusion meant danger. As a result, the brain treats interpersonal conflict as a threat, even when it isn't. That threat response pushes people to prioritize emotional relief over self-protection. Criminals weaponize this instinct. They create situations where refusal feels awkward. They make unreasonable requests sound small. They frame boundaries as hostility. They apply subtle pressure, sighs, disappointment, silence, knowing that the discomfort will do the work for them. This is why manipulators rarely demand. They imply phrases like, "I thought you'd understand." "I wouldn't ask if it wasn't important. It's not a big deal." Each statement places emotional weight on the listener. The conflict-avoidant mind rushes to relieve that weight, often by agreeing. Over time, this mistake trains behavior. The more you avoid conflict, the more you signal that pressure works. Requests escalate, boundaries shrink. The manipulator doesn't need to push harder. You push yourself. Another danger of conflict avoidance is delayed resistance. You might feel uncomfortable, but say nothing. That silence gets interpreted as consent. Later, when you try to assert yourself, the manipulator reframes it as unfair or sudden. Why is this a problem now? Psychologically, this creates self-doubt. You question whether you're being unreasonable. You feel guilty for changing your stance. The result is often continued compliance. Even when discomfort grows, criminals don't fear confrontation. They fear clarity. Clarity forces accountability. Conflict-avoidant behavior delays it, and delay benefits the manipulator. The warning sign is internal tension. If you frequently feel uneasy but stay silent to keep peace, that peace is being bought at your expense. Healthy relationships tolerate disagreement. Manipulative ones rely on your fear of it. Avoiding conflict doesn't make danger disappear. It makes it harder to see. Empathy is one of the most powerful human traits. It allows us to connect, support, and understand others. But in the hands of a criminal, empathy becomes leverage. One of the most dangerous psychological mistakes people make is believing that understanding someone's pain means being responsible for it. Criminals and manipulators rely heavily on this confusion. They don't need to threaten you. They only need you to feel morally responsible for their emotions, circumstances, or outcomes. This mistake often begins with compassion. Someone shares a hardship, a struggle, a story that triggers sympathy. Your natural response is to listen, to care, to want to help. But criminals don't stop at empathy. They slowly convert it into obligation. Psychologically, this works because guilt is a powerful behavioral driver. The brain is deeply conditioned to avoid being seen or seeing itself as uncaring or selfish. When guilt is activated, self-protection weakens. Boundaries feel cruel. Saying no feels immoral. Manipulators understand this instinct perfectly. They frame requests through emotional language rather than logic. They highlight how much they're suffering. They emphasize how little support they have. They subtly suggest that if you don't help, you're contributing to their pain. The message is rarely spoken outright. It doesn't need to be. The implication does the work. Over time, this creates an internal script. If I don't help, I'm a bad person. Once that belief takes root, compliance follows naturally. This mistake is especially dangerous because it targets good people. People who are kind, thoughtful, and emotionally aware are often more vulnerable, not less. Criminals don't exploit cruelty. They exploit compassion. Another layer of this mistake is emotional responsibility. You begin managing someone else's feelings at the expense of your own. You adjust behavior to avoid upsetting them. You tolerate discomfort to prevent their distress. Slowly, your needs become secondary, then invisible. The warning sign is imbalance. Empathy should not feel like pressure. Compassion should not feel like debt. When caring about someone turns into a sense of obligation that overrides your boundaries, empathy has been weaponized. Empathy is meant to connect, not control. Your instincts exist for a reason. They are not random feelings. They are the brain's rapid threat detection system, built from experience, pattern recognition, and subconscious processing. When something feels off, it often is. One of the most common mistakes that makes people easy targets is talking themselves out of their own intuition. You notice inconsistencies, a tone that doesn't match words, a story that changes slightly, a request that feels uncomfortable. But instead of paying attention, you rationalize, you explain it away. You tell yourself you're being paranoid, judgmental, or unfair. Criminals depend on this self-correction. Psychologically, this mistake is driven by over-rationalization and external validation seeking. Modern social conditioning teaches people to doubt gut feelings and prioritize politeness, logic, and social harmony. While those traits are valuable, they become liabilities when instincts are ignored entirely. Manipulators often reinforce this mistake directly. They label intuition as insecurity. They frame concerns as They portray themselves as calm and reasonable, making your emotional response feel excessive by comparison. The more you doubt yourself, the more authority they gain. Over time, this creates a dangerous feedback loop. Each time you ignore your instincts, confidence weakens. The next warning feels quieter. Eventually, you stop listening altogether and rely instead on the manipulator's interpretation of events. This is not weakness, it is conditioning. Criminals understand that. People who doubt themselves are easier to steer. If you don't trust your own judgment, you'll seek reassurance externally. And whoever provides that reassurance controls direction. The warning sign is pattern dismissal. If you frequently sense discomfort but immediately override it with logic, pause. Intuition doesn't speak loudly. It whispers, and when ignored repeatedly, it stops trying. Your instincts are not accusations, they are alerts. At this point, a pattern should be clear. The psychological mistakes criminals exploit are not flaws, they are prosocial traits taken too far: trust, empathy, harmony, self-reflection. These qualities help societies function. But when they operate without boundaries or awareness, they become predictable. Criminals don't look for people who are aggressive or suspicious. They look for people who give the benefit of the doubt. People who explain things away. People who don't want to seem rude. People who assume good intentions. In other words, normal, decent human beings. This is why victim blaming is misguided. Being targeted is not a sign of stupidity. It's a sign of psychological predictability. Once a criminal identifies which traits override your self-protection, they don't need force, they need patience. Awareness disrupts that predictability. One of the most subtle psychological mistakes that makes people easy targets is the need for approval. Approval feels safe. It feels reassuring. It signals acceptance. But when approval becomes more important than clarity, it quietly hands power to whoever controls that validation. Criminals understand that people who seek approval are easier to influence than people who seek truth. This mistake often shows up in the form of hesitation. Instead of asking direct questions, you wait for cues. Instead of demanding clarity, you look for reassurance. Instead of challenging inconsistencies, you prioritize being liked, respected, or seen as reasonable. Psychologically, this is driven by social conditioning. From a young age, many people are taught that being agreeable is virtuous, that questioning authority is rude, that making others uncomfortable is wrong. Over time, this conditioning creates an internal rule. Approval equals safety. Criminals exploit this rule relentlessly. They position themselves as authority figures, experts, or emotionally important individuals. They speak with confidence. They project certainty. When you feel unsure, your brain seeks alignment rather than verification. You nod? You agree? You suppress doubts because disagreement feels socially risky. This is why criminals often sound calm, assured, and decisive. Confidence is persuasive, even when it's false. And when approval-seeking individuals encounter confidence, they default to compliance. Another layer of this mistake is validation dependence. When your sense of correctness depends on someone else's reaction, your judgment becomes externalized. You begin measuring decisions by how they will be received, not by whether they make sense. Over time, this erodes autonomy. You stop asking, "Is this right?" and start asking, "Will this upset them?" That shift is critical because criminals don't need you to believe them. They just need you not to challenge them. The warning sign is silence. If you regularly hold back questions, doubts, or objections to maintain approval, clarity has already been sacrificed. Healthy interactions welcome questions. Manipulative ones rely on unchallenged authority. Approval feels good. Clarity keeps you safe. The final psychological mistake criminals depend on is delayed exit. Most victims don't fail to notice danger. They notice it and then stay anyway. They stay because they don't want to be rude. They stay because they don't want to be wrong. They stay because they've already invested time, emotion, or effort. They stay because leaving feels uncomfortable. Criminals know this. This mistake is driven by several powerful cognitive biases. One is the sunk cost fallacy. the belief that past investment justifies continued involvement. Another is commitment bias, where people feel pressured to remain consistent with previous decisions. Even when circumstances change, psychologically, leaving feels like admitting failure. It feels like overreacting. It feels embarrassing. The brain resists these feelings by rationalizing discomfort. Instead of responding to it, criminals exploit this hesitation. They rely on your politeness, your patience, your hope that things will improve. They escalate slowly, knowing that each additional step makes departure harder. By the time the situation becomes clearly harmful, emotional and psychological investment has already formed. This is why early exits are rare, and late exits are painful. Another factor is social pressure. People fear judgment. They worry about how leaving will be perceived. They imagine having to explain themselves. Criminals benefit from this internal dialogue. As long as you're debating internally, they remain in control. The warning sign is justification. When you find yourself explaining away discomfort, it's probably nothing. I'm being too sensitive. I'll give it more time. Pause. Discomfort is not a request for more data. It's a signal. Leaving early is not dramatic. It's decisive. Criminals don't need you to stay forever. They just need you to stay long enough. Taken together, these 6 psychological mistakes reveal something important. They are not weaknesses. They are survival traits. Trust builds cooperation. Empathy builds connection. Conflict avoidance maintains harmony. Self-reflection promotes growth. Approval-seeking ensures belonging. Patience allows relationships to develop. But when these traits operate without awareness, they become predictable, and predictability is what criminals exploit. Criminals don't rely on force because force is risky. Psychology is quieter, cleaner, more effective. They wait for the mind to open the door before they ever step inside. Understanding these mistakes doesn't mean becoming suspicious of everyone. It means restoring balance. Trust with verification, empathy with boundaries, patience with discernment, kindness with clarity. Awareness does not harden you, it strengthens you. Now, reflect honestly. Which of these 6 mistakes have you recognized in yourself or in someone you know? Share your thoughts in the comments. Conversations like these protect more people than silence ever could. If this breakdown helped, you see human behavior more clearly. Like this video, subscribe to Criminology. And turn on notifications for more deep dives into criminal psychology, manipulation, and the hidden mechanics of influence. Because criminals don't succeed by being stronger, they succeed by being understood. Too late, and now you're early.